Now, summary response is the basic building block of all academic writing. Now, it's used in other writings as well, but in this class we're going to focus on academic writing. So you summarize something, in this case, in this assignment of text, and then you respond to that summary. Okay, now that's an important distinction that we'll talk about in a minute, or perhaps in another lecture. You're responding not to the original text, but you're responding to your summary. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about summary as the basic building block. Sometimes when you're doing research, you are writing about another journal article. So you summarize it and then you respond to it. Maybe in literature, you're writing about a novel. So you might summarize it and then you respond to it. Even in the social sciences and the hard sciences, you summarize and then respond. In this case, perhaps you're summarizing a lab experiment. A lab report is basically a summary of the experiment you did. So you take that experiment, you summarize it, and then you do a conclusion at the end about what you discovered. That's your response. Okay? Now, of course, in this course, we're going to be focusing on summarizing text. So let's talk about that for a minute. You'll be summarizing texts that are anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 words long. Now, that should give you pause, and it should make you realize whenever you're writing a summary, you're leaving more out than you're including, right? Because you're only going to write something that's maybe anywhere from 100 to 300 words long. Now, that's not a length requirement, either at minimum or the maximum. You need to write as much as you need to give the reader the gist of your summary. Okay. If you can do so in 100 words, great. If it takes you 300, that's fine. If it takes you 400 or 500, that's fine. Okay? Believe it or not, it's harder to write a good summary in 100 words than it is to write a good summary in 300 words. That takes a really, really accomplished writer to do that summary, because you do have to give the gist of it. You do have to give something substantial. Now, in elementary school or high school even, perhaps even in some of your lower division college courses, you were taught to summarize to come up with the main idea of whatever you're reading. And that's fine. That's perfectly legitimate summary. But I want to suggest another possibility to you, and which is that you need a criteria for how to condense your essay, right? How to condense your summary. And that criteria you've been taught was to give the main idea, but there are other criteria for how to condense, how to cut out more that you include. And that criteria is your summary, is your response. So when you think about it, even though the summary comes first and the response comes second, you might want to write your response first. Because when you read the essay, something may strike you as really interesting, and you may decide, that's what I want to write about. But it's not the main idea. That happens all the time. There are so many ideas stuffed into your average academic journal article that there are many things you can write about. So for instance, in Corder's article, his main idea is that creative essay writing and academic writing have something to contribute to each other. They can learn from each other, and they shouldn't be artificially separated. Maybe you find that interesting. Maybe you see things you can respond to in that main idea. Or maybe when you're looking at it, you'll notice that when he gives examples of these two kinds of writing, he talks about, for instance, in the section where he talks about the state park he went to and the military officer he writes about, and later on he talks about all the different mistakes he made. Maybe what really strikes you is how difficult it is for us to be confident in what we write and confident that we don't make mistakes. There are so many experts out there, so you might want to focus on that part. Now, you don't ignore the rest of it. You give lip service to it. In other words, you say, okay, in the article, Corder writes about what academic writing and creative writing contribute to each other, and we shouldn't artificially separate them. In the section the last section of the article, he talks about all the mistakes he made, and I want to focus on that. And then you write your summary of that section, and you focus on that section and about the difficulty of being absolutely certain about everything you know when you're writing, or everything you're writing about, right? And then you write your response about that. So what I'm suggesting you do is you use your response as the criteria for deciding what you're going to include and what you're going to leave out in your summary, rather than what is the main idea, right? Now that doesn't mean don't use the main idea, because you may find that the main idea is what you'd really like to write about. So I hope this helped you out in thinking about how you're going to approach your summary response.